Welcome to the How of Business with your host, Henry Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to this episode of the How of Business. This is Henry Lopez, and my guest today is Jeff Wetzler. Jeff, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Henry.
Absolutely. Jeff is with me today to explain how the insights that you need to make smarter decisions, to develop more creative solutions, faster improvements, and deeper connections are hidden in plain sight. The insights we need to live and are in the heads and hearts of people right around us. And yet too often, especially for me, people don't tell you what you most need to hear. And so Jeff is going to share why it doesn't have to be this way and some key insights from his new book. If you want to get more information about the How of Business, including the show notes page of this episode, and learn about my one-on-one and group coaching programs, please visit thehowofbusiness.com. I also encourage you to subscribe to my show wherever you might be listening so you don't miss any new episodes. So let me tell you a little bit more about Jeff. Jeff Wetzler has been on a quarter-century quest to transform learning opportunities, blending a unique set of leadership experiences in the fields of business and education. He's pursued this quest as a management consultant to the world's top corporations, as a learning facilitator for leaders around the world, as Chief Learning Officer at Teach for America, and most recently as CEO of Transcend, a nationally recognized innovation organization. Jeff is the author of the book I mentioned. It's entitled Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. Jeff earned a doctorate in adult learning and leadership from Columbia University and a bachelor's in psychology from Brown University. He is a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network and is an Edmund Hillary Fellow. He lives in the New York City area with his wife, 2 children, and apparently a puppy as well. Jeff Wetzler, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
I welcome you to the show. This is an interesting topic. I've previewed the book and have a lot of questions. And so let's just get right into it. The book again is titled Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdoms of People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. So the question I always ask is, why did you write the book and who is it for primarily?
The book, I would say, is primarily for anyone who is leading, managing, or working with other people, and who has some degree of interdependence with people, where you are counting on other people, for success and for shared success with them. And I wrote the book because the problem that the book is trying to address is one that has plagued me as a manager and leader, and I think it's a universal problem, which is simply that the things that we most need to know that would really help us truly succeed, have deep partnerships, have fulfilling relationships, etc., we too often don't find out from other people. They keep those ideas and insights and feedback and perspectives locked away in their heads and in their hearts. And so we all pay the cost of that. But equally, I wrote this book because it doesn't have to be that way. I think that this problem can also be an opportunity. And if we can actually figure out how to really tap into what someone else is thinking and feeling and knowing, we can have breakthroughs. We can make better decisions together. We can innovate better together. We can save time. We can deepen our relationships with people. And over the years, I have been very fortunate to benefit from a set of mentors and ideas that have shared with me, I think, some incredibly valuable and practical tools for how to overcome this problem. And I wrote the book essentially to pay it forward, so that other people can benefit from the same kinds of things that I have been so fortunate to hear and benefit from my mentors and teachers.
This openness to, and we'll get into the how of it in a moment, but this openness to ask questions, to want to know other people's ideas, opinions, whatever the case might be. Do you think you were that type of person from early on, or as you mentioned, did you have to develop that skill and openness?
I think, as with many things for a lot of people, for me, it was probably a combination of both. I think I was naturally curious and interested, but I also grew up in a in a place, in a situation where I didn't always feel like I belonged and fit in.
Mm.
And sometimes it felt safer for me to keep my mouth shut and to listen. And sometimes it felt safer to ask questions rather than state my opinion.
I see.
And when you do that over and over again, it kind of becomes a way of being. And then sometimes it turns into a muscle.
Yeah.
And so I think it actually, over time, has served me well.
Yeah, it becomes a superpower. You mentioned before we started recording that you moved around a lot, if I gathered correctly, as a child.
That's right. That's right.
I had a similar experience, and I think you develop again because you're desperately trying to fit in. You become very observant of your environment, but you also tend to be, at least for me, I was very introverted. But
Me
you're
too.
right. I always kind of had to judge the lay of the land first before I jumped in, right?
Yeah, and that teaches you skills when you learn how to do that at a young age.
You mentioned interdependency. So if we look at it from a business owner's perspective, immediately what comes to mind is our teams, our staff, our employees, but then our customers or clients as well. We need to know what they're thinking and what opinions they have, either about working with us and for us, or about what they like or don't like about our product and service, right?
100%. And I would say it extends in addition to vendors and suppliers and other
Yes.
business partners as well.
Mhm.
I really think it's kind of a 360-degree application. Every single person that a business has as a stakeholder has something that can teach a business owner. And so I think we can talk about examples in many different directions.
This seems to me like it's a challenge for most of us, including myself, for maybe a couple of primary reasons that come to mind. One is we kind of touched on, I'm afraid to ask. I'm afraid to ask because I don't want to know really. I don't want to hear it, right? Especially if it's criticism or some kind of rejection of my idea or my product or my service. I may not want to hear it, so I may have developed that sense that, well, I'm just not going to ask, right? Because I'm afraid of what the truth might be.
Absolutely. That is definitely a barrier. I think there's other barriers, such as if I ask, it might expose that I don't know something. And there's a lot of, cultural messages, especially for leaders, that you're supposed to have it all together. You're supposed to be the one with the answers. You're not the one with the questions, not the one who doesn't know something. And so I think that could be another barrier. And I think there can be barriers just related to skills. In some ways it seems natural. We all kind of know how to ask questions, but it's actually a science and it's actually a skill set. And if we haven't been trained, that can also hold us back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. That's such a powerful point. I've come to really understand that here in the last, several years, that people really are the people that we're leading. We mistakenly think they want us to have all of the answers. In
Right.
fact, that's not the case. Vulnerability is good. They just want to know that we are going to lead them to solve whatever it is or to go get the answer, right? And they may have an input, they may have an idea that might be worthwhile that we need to explore. And I think that's what people are looking for from their leaders.
100% agree. And if they have an idea or an insight that's part of the answer, if a leader can pull that out of them and activate them, that can be one of the most empowering things to do for people around you, because then they feel more powerful. And then they feel like they're part of the solution and they feel more and more invested both in the company, but also in the leader.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that it can come and play, though, Jeff, including for myself, is arrogance. Right? Arrogance can lead to say, I'm prejudging this person. I can't imagine they have anything to say that's going to be of value to me.
Absolutely. And even if it doesn't go so far as to be arrogance, just the idea of certainty. In the book, I talk about how we are trapped in this certainty loop where our pre-existing assumptions about the world lead us to very quickly size up a situation or a person in ways that confirm what we already believed from the beginning. And it happens in microseconds. And so we walk around essentially saying, yeah, I know how this is. I know how this person is. I know what this business issue is, etc. And we feel so certain that it doesn't even occur to us that there might be something we don't know. And I think that that's actually one of the most dangerous traps that we can fall into, but it's also one of the ones that we can do something about. And we can talk more about that as well.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. When I was thinking about this, what always comes to mind is I happened to have the opportunity to work with a gentleman. His name is Boris. And this was back in the 90s when I had an opportunity to go to a tech startup, and he was one of the co-founders.
Okay.
And in my experience, he's at least as intelligent as anybody I've ever worked with, and probably the most intelligent person I ever worked with. I mean, I think genius level. However, the thing that impressed me so much about him that I had never seen before, and it really helped me a lot, is he always seemed genuinely curious about whomever and whatever somebody else might have to say. Even though he was obviously the smartest guy in the room, he always genuinely was looking for other people's opinions and inputs. And that so impressed me that somebody at that level did not have that arrogance. In fact, he saw it just as you're putting forth, I think, in this book and in this knowledge, that there is something possibly to learn from just about everybody, if not everybody.
I love that example. And maybe just to toss a question back to you, what was the impact of his way of operating on you or the people around you?
It created a culture of collaboration, of trust. He modeled for me how to do that better, right? He helped me be smarter, quote unquote. I wasn't going to get any more intelligent, but he helped me be smarter about leveraging those around me, and sharing and not letting that get in the way. So, yeah, am I answering the question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, in some ways, I think sounds like he helped you not only have a good role model, but also in some ways see your own intelligence and see your own brilliance by asking you questions and tapping into your ideas. Is that right?
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. And he helped to set the tone and the culture. I mean, at that time I was employee like 105, so a very small high-tech startup environment that is very naturally very competitive, yet I think he helped to set the tone in that organization of collaboration, free collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that brings up for me is this idea of the collective intelligence or the collective genius that exists, I think, in every team and in every organization. And I think great leaders know how to activate that. And that collective intelligence lives in the minds and hearts of everybody in the group. And when you can know how to ask the right questions and bring out people's best ideas, you're amplifying the intelligence that you already have in front of you.
Yeah, well said. All right, let's get into the how. You lay out an approach, the ask approach. And so let's introduce that first, and then we'll go through the 5 steps. But introduce the ask approach, if you would.
Absolutely. So the ask approach is a research-backed, practice-tested method for learning from the people around you. It is a set of practices and skills that I believe anybody can master. Just like anything, it takes some practice. But when you do it right, it gets you so much closer to exactly what you were just describing in the situation, to a situation where you do unlock the collective genius of your people and your organization, where you do make better decisions, where you have better relationships. So that's the goal of it. And there are 5 practices, and I call them steps because they make sense to do sequentially. Although, as with anything in real life, you always double back and go in a more messy, organic order in the real world. But if I were to start with the first one, it's called choose curiosity. And the first thing to say about this is the choose part, because I think a lot of people think about curiosity as a trait that some people have or don't have. This person's curious, this person's less curious, or maybe it's a state of mind that we're in. I'm feeling curious today. And what this is posing is the possibility that curiosity is a choice that we can always make, that is always available to every one of us, if we decide to go there. And it's a type of curiosity that in the book I talk about it as connective curiosity. So it's not just, I wonder about the history of Russia, or I wonder about, some other topic that I could go look up on a book, but it's the type of curiosity that's really about, I wonder about this other person. I wonder what their experience is. I wonder what they know that I don't know, etc. And when we choose curiosity, the thing we put at the front of our mind is one single question, which is, what can I learn from this person? And it starts with the premise that there is always something valuable to learn from this person. And if we put ourselves in that mindset of what can we learn from this person, we're far more likely to actually be genuinely curious. And it matters to be genuinely curious because people can tell if we're asking questions from a place of true curiosity or just going through the motions. Right. But also, I have found that when you're genuinely curious, it awakens in the other person a desire to respond and a desire to share when they sense that. And so the authenticity of being curious deeply matters. I'll pause there for a second. We can say more
Sure. Yeah,
about it.
no, great stuff. And so, in part, what you're saying is, if I'm gathering it right, is it's not a trait, it's a skill that I can develop. I think that, to your point, all humans are naturally curious, right? And so it's a matter of developing that skill, but being willing to use it. One of the things, if I'm honest, that holds me back sometimes is like, oh, but gosh, is this going to turn into a painful, protracted conversation that I'm not interested in entertaining, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that sometimes can hold me back from being genuinely curious. I want to get to what I want to get out of it, and sometimes as quickly as it benefits me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it is, it is a choice. I'm not saying you have to be curious about every single thing and every single person, every single moment. That's why it is a choice. But if you believe there's something important to learn from the other person, whether that's feedback and perspective they could offer you, or a great idea that they have, or something that they're up against that you can help them with, you got to start by being curious so that you can increase your chances of getting, getting that kind of learning.
There's no doubt. One of the things that I am and I've developed is I'm situationally curious. So when I travel, for example, I'm always watching how people interact with spaces or experiences or with others.
Yes.
That's part of it, but that's not enough, right?
Well, I think it is a great start, and you can use that curiosity and build on it. But I do think if you really want to learn from the people right around you in your business or in your life, you don't have to travel to do that. You can come right back to home and say, what can I learn from them? And one of the interesting things about getting curious is, even though it's really about what can I learn from the other person, a lot of it starts with getting curious about what's the story that I'm already holding about that person. If I think that person is not working hard enough for XYZ reason, if I think that our strategy is right, but this person doesn't think it's right, it actually starts by understanding my own story and getting curious about what information might I have been overlooking? What's a different way to interpret what they did or their behavior, etc. And when we start to do that, we inject question marks into our own certainty. And that's part of what breaks us out of that certainty loop that I was talking about earlier. And once we start to have those questions, it's almost like, yeah, for sure, I want to know what maybe there is something I was overlooking. And it makes it much easier to be curious about them.
Yeah, excellent. All right, step 2 is make it safe. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so even if we are curious, we've gotten ourselves to the point where we really actually do want to learn from the other person, there's no guarantee that other person is going to feel safe telling us a true answer to our questions. And I learned this the hard way when I stepped into my first operating role, and I thought I was really good at asking questions. And I thought I had posed all the right questions, and I really genuinely was curious about my team, but they didn't tell me the challenges that they were actually struggling with. And we almost had a massive breakdown in one of the things that we were operating together, because they were facing challenges, but didn't feel safe to tell me the truth. And I learned, from that moment onward, the importance of the power of your position, that people can be afraid to actually say what they're really thinking. But also, anytime we're operating across lines of difference of one way or the other, that can also make it less safe for people as well. And I'm sure you're familiar with, and many of your listeners are probably familiar with, I think the groundbreaking research that Professor Amy Edmondson has done on psychological safety in the cultures of organizations, which basically says that if you want people to speak up, they actually need to feel like there's not going to be punishment or retribution. And this step, or this practice, make it safe, extends from that and says, at the interpersonal level, in a one-on-one interaction that we're having, or a one-on-few interaction that we're having, what can we actually do to really make it safe for other people to tell us what they really think, especially if they think it's going to be hard for us to hear. And it includes things like, connecting with them on their terms and on their turf, not in spaces or places or times that are easier for us. It includes things like actually opening up ourselves and saying what might be hard for us to share, that might feel vulnerable, or why we actually are dependent on them and need to ask them this question. And I think most importantly, it involves what I call radiating resilience, letting them know that we're not going to crumble based on what they have to say. And also, we're not going to hold them responsible for our reactions, that we can handle it.
So going back to So a couple of things I hear there. One is, I think if I'm interpreting it right, if it applies, going into their space. So, if it's on the production line, into their area of work, not calling somebody into my office and saying, "Hey, tell me what you really think. What's really going on out there?" But to going into their environment is one thing I'm hearing. But if I go back to the example you were sharing, how did you begin to solve that? How did you begin to make it safe for that team to really tell you what was going on?
Yeah. So so first of all, and what you just said in terms of the, going to their turf, for the book, I interviewed some of the world's most iconic CEOs, people like Bill George from Medtronic, Irene Rosenfeld from Kraft. And they went out of their way to say, I would never call someone into my office and sit across the big CEO desk from them and expect that they're not going to feel intimidated and they're going to tell me.
Right.
At minimum, we would sit on a couch together, or we'd sit across, to take away any boundaries, but more likely I'm going to go do a ride along with them,
Yep.
on the sales floor, or I'm going to go to the cafeteria and those kinds of things. And in my situation, I try to do very similar things. I would actually try to have one-on-one meals with a number of people, really understand them and their story and who they are and what motivates them, and share similarly of mine. In a way that would establish a much deeper level of trust. And I would say it also applies at the personal level. I have a teenage daughter, and when she comes home from school and I say to her, "How was your day?" and I really want to know what was going on for her, I get nothing, absolutely nothing. But if I stay up with her till 11:30 p.m. when she's done with her homework, she wants to tell me everything.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm exhausted,
Right.
but part of making it safe is connecting on their terms. And so, if I want to learn from her, I got to go to her turf and her terms, and then that's what I'm going to learn.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Okay, so your situation, what were a couple of the things that you did to ease that situation where you were not getting that feedback that you mentioned?
So it included things like, taking people out for breakfast,
I see.
or for lunch, or taking walks with people, etc.
Mhm.
But also admitting to them, I missed some things here, and clearly I didn't make it easy for you to tell me. And even what could I be doing that would make it easier for you next time to tell me? And a whole range of those kinds of conversations and questions, and also letting them know that I'm not blaming them for what they would have to say to me. I'm not going to shoot the messenger. In fact, I'm going to say, this is really valuable because now we can solve this thing together.
Yeah. And if you do if you do shoot the messenger, that spreads really quickly, and people
Really
quickly
quickly.
learn that you never do that again, right? So
Absolutely. Yes. 100% agree.
hard to overcome that. And just very quickly, on the other end of the spectrum example, I think that came to mind immediately when we were talking about make it safe, is when you'll go to a restaurant or some other business, and the person delivering the service puts a survey in front of you. And I can't imagine anybody that really feels safe to answer honestly when you are put in that spot. That's another, I think, example of that, if I'm getting it.
Absolutely. When the person who you might be giving feedback about is
Right.
literally standing and looking over your shoulder at the
Yeah.
feedback that you're going to give.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're thinking to yourself, am
You're
I going to
not going to
offend this
get any
person?
valuable information there, I don't think, as a business owner.
Exactly. That's right. You have to let your customers know that you actually really want to know what they have to say. And in fact, that their critiques and criticisms are as important, if not more important, than just giving you praise as well. And some of that comes down to maybe that's a good segue to the next step, which is
Yes.
it comes down to what questions you ask.
Yes.
And so step 3 is pose quality questions. And just while we're sticking on that example, it's a world of difference to say, what feedback do you have for us, versus to say, what are 2 things that we could do better. In the second question, you're far more likely to get actually concrete ideas and information from that person, versus people, if you say, what feedback do you have, they may think you're fishing for a compliment, or they may not know what you mean, etc.
Right.
And so, we all know that good communicators ask questions, and probably we all have a few go-to questions that we ask, things like, how might we help me understand this, or that kind of thing. But I think what most of us don't know is that there's actually a science to questions, and there's a taxonomy of different questions that can be used for different purposes. Just the same way that a surgeon would ask for this particular tool for this cut, or this particular tool for this this part of the procedure. We can treat questions in the same way, and we can be as precise with the questions that we learn to ask, as as anyone else is with tools that they use for their specialty. And I think for managers and leaders and owners of businesses, questions are some of the very most important tools to have in the tool belt of leadership. Just to give some examples, some of us might ask the question, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Or "Where do you come down on this issue?" Which is what I call the kind of a question I call "hear their headline." What's the headline view that they have on something? And it's amazing how often people don't tell us their headline if we don't even ask them that question. But too many of us stop at that question instead of then saying, "Let's dig deeper. What led you to that view? Where did that come from? What makes you think that? How did you walk me through the process you used to get there?" And that can reveal so much about why someone believes something. And sometimes the why is more important than actually, the position that they articulated at the beginning. But I advocate to don't stop there. Then to ask them questions that I call "see what they see," which is to say, give me some examples. Don't just tell me that this is your reason, but like, what have you seen in your experience? And a lot of people will not give you those direct personal examples unless you go that far down and ask them that. And one thing I encourage is to not just ask for examples or data, but to sometimes say, "Tell me some stories," because sometimes people will feel hesitant to give data points. They feel like, "Well, my data is not bulletproof. It's not buttoned up. I don't have it in charts or whatever." But if you just say, "Tell me a couple stories of when you've seen that," you can get so much more learning from people.
Tell me a couple stories. Excellent. Those are great tactics to use. I mean, the whole skill of asking questions is so powerful in any position, but certainly as a leader. So thanks for sharing those examples. This is Henry Lopez, briefly pausing this episode to invite you to join me for one of my next live online workshops. During these interactive workshops, I cover a specific topic that will help you with starting and growing your small business. Just visit thehowofbusiness.com to learn more and to register. If you need help creating an effective business plan, for example, to start your first small business, then my next business plan workshop may be just what you need. Or perhaps you need help completing your financial projections for your new business. Well, I have a workshop for that too. And if you're already operating your business, then you can probably benefit from learning how to better manage the cash in your business by attending my cash flow management online workshop. These are just a few of the workshops that I currently offer, and I keep these workshops to a small number of participants so that we have the time to answer all of your questions. Whether it's getting started with your first business or growing and exiting your existing small business, I can help you get there with one of my online workshops. To find out more and to register for a live online workshop, please visit thehowofbusiness.com. Take that next step today towards finally realizing your business ownership dreams. I look forward to having you join me for my next workshop. All right, step number 4 is listen to learn.
Yes. So once we've posed the question, everything comes down to how well we listen to people's answers to those questions. And I think a lot of us think that we know how to listen, but there's a difference between listening and hearing. We can actually be sitting there with our ears open, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be hearing what someone has to say. And in fact, all kinds of research shows that we think we're much better at listening than we really are. For the book, I interviewed professional listeners, including journalists, whose job it is just to ask questions and listen. I remember talking to one journalist named Jenny Anderson, who would tell me that she would, wherever she could, she would audio record her interviews with the research subjects for her journalism. And then afterwards, she would go back and listen to the recordings, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times. And every single time she would listen to the recording, she would hear something that she hadn't heard the previous time that was incredibly important. And I think to myself, if a professional listener, like an award-winning journalist like Jenny, misses something the first time, the second time, even the third time, imagine how much we're missing when we just listen to that very first time and we think we've heard what someone has to say.
Yeah.
And so this practice is really about listening to learn. And I talk about how can we triple the amount of information that we're hearing by listening through 3 different channels, not just the content of what someone's saying, which is, I think, what most of us are, have been trained to listen for, but also the emotion that people are expressing and also the action that they're taking in the conversation. And those are three different kinds of things that are always going on in a conversation. And if we can learn to really isolate each one and then put them back together, it truly triples the amount of things that we can hear from any single person that we're talking to.
Right. So the words that they're speaking, the emotions that they're communicating through their body language and their tone and their volume and so forth. And then the actions is what, their physical actions? What do you mean by actions?
So let's say that I'm talking to somebody and they are coming to me complaining about a challenge that they're having with one of our customers. And they are asking me to take on doing something to make it easier for them or deal with the customer, et cetera. So the content is, here's the situation, here's what happened, here's, I said this, she said this is what played out. The emotion might be, I'm feeling helpless, I'm feeling frustrated, et cetera.
Yep.
The action that they're taking is they are enlisting me to support their position and trying to get me to do action. And so that's what I mean when I talk about the actions that they're actually taking in a situation.
Yeah. Got it. I see. So that's that active listening to these three ways immediately. Then when you were describing that, tells me that's one of the reasons why when we try to do this over something like email, we're blind to some critical components to this.
Absolutely. Email, gives us just a tiny, tiny slice of what someone may actually be thinking, and which is why I've learned over time, sometimes the hard way, that if there's anything that has any charge to it or that has anything of consequence, get off email and pick up the phone and actually have that conversation, because you're going to hear through all three channels so much richer information.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to that if possible, or if it makes sense, if I'm having this conversation or asking these questions or listening on that person's turf or environment, as opposed to where I have the obvious position of power, they're more likely to genuinely communicate and tell me what they're really thinking and express what they're really thinking.
That's right. And especially if you can give them the choice of what turf to be on and what time of day and what, and how to do it, et cetera. They, often they may say, come to me, but they may also say, let's take a walk, or let's do a phone call, or I'll come to your office. And so I think even more important than doing it on their terms is giving them the choice to say, what are the terms of what we're going to do?
All right. Step number 5. So 1 is choose curiosity. 2 is make it safe. 3 is pose quality questions. 4 is listen to learn. And 5 is reflect and reconnect.
Yes. So let's talk about that one. I think that this one is actually the most important of all 5, because this is really about what do we do with what we've heard from people. And so many times we can have conversations that go in one ear and out the other, and nothing really changes. And then people become cynical because they say, why bother saying anything? Because nothing's going to change. And so reflection is really what turns talk into action. And I think for a lot of us, reflection can seem kind of mysterious, and maybe, this is something I can only do if I go on a meditation retreat, or I'm a monk, climbing up a mountain or something like that. But reflection is actually a process that can be broken down and structured into a concrete set of steps that we can all take. And it includes things like saying to ourselves, all right, let me take stock of what I heard. What of what I heard is valuable, and what do I want to discard? Okay, of the valuable stuff, let me just run through some questions here. How does it change my view or my mindset about the situation? That's one question. Another is, what steps and actions can I take from what I've heard from this person? And a third question is there any deeper learning? Does this challenge any deeper assumptions or worldviews or ways of being that I have, et cetera? So I call these 3 reflective turns. And this is really about squeezing the meaning, squeezing the value of what we've heard from someone. We can do it by ourselves through journaling, but it's often helpful to do it with a thought partner as well, so that they can help us get out of our own biases. But reflection is what really makes the difference between having the conversation versus having the conversation and actually we've learned something and it becomes meaningful. But the other thing that I always like to say, which is why I call it not just reflect, but reflect and reconnect, is that it's so powerful to take our reflections back to the person who shared something with us and to say to them, here's what I took away from what you had to say, and here's what I'm going to do about it, and here's how it helped me grow. Thank you. And first of all, just that act of going back and letting them know that their words were not wasted, their time was not wasted, that you actually appreciate them, makes such a difference in terms of the relationship. But equally important, it gives them a chance to correct you and to say, well, actually, that's good, but you didn't have to go that far. I didn't mean to take that, etc. And so it just, it's a chance to even tune your reflection that much more. And I have also found that this reconnect piece dramatically increases the chances that people are going to share again in the future when next time you ask them a question, because they believe that it's worth their time, because you're the kind of person who takes their views so seriously that you've really thought it through and that you've taken the time to go back and let them know what difference it made for you.
Okay, but two things here, Jeff. One is
Yes.
that as we look at it as a small business owner with our teams, our employees, sometimes a lot of times, it's noise. It's stuff that might be that individual's perspective, but it doesn't make sense for me or the organization to take any action on it at this point in time.
Yes.
So that's one of it. How do I communicate that? Secondly, I feel sometimes like, boy, I don't know that I have the time to give each of these input points, even though I've asked for it, that much effort or time. I simply don't have the time. What do you say to me about those 2 points?
Yeah, I appreciate those. So I'd say on the first point, just because someone has shared something with you does not obligate you to act on it. You get to choose, and that's why the first part of reflection is really separating the wheat from the chaff and asking yourself what's valuable and what's not valuable. That being said, if you've taken the time to ask someone for input, or they've taken it upon themselves to give you input, it doesn't take that long to say to them, I'm not going to act on it, and here's why. And that can make a huge difference in terms of their willingness and their investment to contribute to you in the future. This is why I think a lot of people in companies get cynical about employee surveys or feedback surveys, because they just, they put in their ideas, they never hear anything more. They think no one, they don't even know if anyone's read them, etc.
Right.
But if in the book, I talk about actually some schools that do interesting things where they ask their students for input, and then they say to students, here's what we heard. Bucket 1 is ideas you shared that we're going to act on today. Boom. Bucket 2, ideas that you shared that we like, but we can't act on immediately, but we're going to be thinking about how we can act on them. And bucket 3, here's some ones that we are not going to put in place, and here's why. And just the explaining, here's why. People don't need for all their ideas to go into play to get implemented, but they want to know they've been thought through and they've been taken seriously enough, and have the courtesy to say we're not going to implement this one, and here's why. And the here's why can be important because it can lead the person to say, oh, if that's the reason why, then maybe I have a different idea that could fit what you're trying to do better.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the time that it takes, I'll say a couple things. Sometimes it can be done in a group setting. So, in the organization that I co-lead, we do an annual retreat every year where we bring, 100 plus people together. My co-CEO and I do a session where we share here's what we heard and here's what we learned this year from you all, and here's how we're learning from it and growing from it and making meaning of it. And so we don't have to take it as 100 individual conversations. You can do it in group settings, you can do it in team meetings, etc. And there's more efficient ways to do it by grouping people. But also, I don't think reflection has to take that long. It doesn't really take, it could take you 2 minutes to run through this question of, what steps am I going to take from this? Is there anything that changes my mind, etc.? And so I want to demystify the idea that reflection has to be, a 2-hour journaling process. It's just more a matter of building these steps into your thought process.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Great tips there. Thank you. All right. We'll move on from those details. Obviously, that's what the book is about. Again, the book is titled Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. And you've got a website dedicated to it, and that's where I found the assessment. What's the website we should go to learn more?
It's www.askapproach.com.
So I took the assessment, which is a great assessment. It's a tool, it's a free tool that he has on the website that'll ask you some questions and then rate your level, right? Or my score.
Yes.
On this. What would you call this assessment?
It's called the Ask Assessment. And the idea basically is it's holding up a mirror. It's helping us to see how good are we at learning from the people around us. And so it's a very quick set of multiple choice questions that you get, and you do get an overall score. But what I think is even more important about the assessment is that it actually breaks it down by each of the 5 practices that we just talked about. So you may be really good at choosing curiosity, but the thing you need to work on is how to make it safe for other people to tell you the truth. And the assessment will give you a sub-score for each of those 5 areas. And then you can know what parts of the book you may want to zero in on first or spend more time with.
Yeah, so I didn't do very well. I'm going to have to retake the course, but I scored apprentice.
There you go.
And my lowest areas were choose curiosity and make it safe. Those were my lowest. Those were in the developing category. You have them at developing, proficient, or excelling.
Yes.
And then listen to learn, I'm excelling.
Well, there you go. And that fits well with being a podcast host.
Exactly. I'm good at asking questions and I'm pretty good at listening. Although, not to go off on another tangent, but part of what makes active listening hard, and you made the example of the journalist who gets to record, is no matter what, when we're asking questions, we're navigating a lot of things. I'm thinking about what I need to ask next. I'm taking in the environment, the cues, all of that. I might be managing a time constraint. All of that is working in my head, whether I like it or not, right?
Yes. And I'll tell you one tip that I have found and learned from mentors can make a huge difference in moments like that, which is what they call paraphrase and test, which is just to simply say, here's what I think I heard you say. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
And that can slow everything down in a conversation, because you don't have to be rushing to the next thing. You don't have to be thinking about what you're going to say next. You just basically checking, did I hear it right? It sends a huge message to the other person that I care enough about what you had to say to check. But I will say, when I do that, at least half the time, someone says, well, yeah, you kind of got that right, but there's more to it.
Mm-hmm.
And they share more, or they say, you missed this piece of it as well. And so I learned so much more when I just pause and ask that question.
Okay. What would you like to share with us about Transcend and the work that you're doing there with schools?
Transcend is a nonprofit organization. I co-founded it together with Elon Samoa. We're co-CEOs of the organization at this point, although later this year he's going to take on the solo leadership as the CEO of the organization. And Transcend is focused on supporting school communities around the country to reimagine what school can be. As you may well know, most schools in the mainstream in this country and elsewhere operate on a model of school that is over 100 years old. It's called the factory model of school.
Yep.
Kids are kind of batched into, classes of anywhere from 20 to 30 plus kids. They move on year by year, almost irrespective of what they learn. They're learning stuff that is not typically that interesting or relevant to them. And it really hasn't changed. The schools that my kids go to are really not that different than the schools that I went to compared to the schools my parents went to. And so Transcend works to help people who want to actually innovate, to say, how do we create experiences that truly put kids at the center, where their interests are driving how they spend their time, where they are just completely on fire about what they're learning, where it's not just about memorizing information, but it's really about solving problems that they care about and that the world needs them to solve, where it's not just about what's happening in their brain, but also how they work with other people, and how they interact in their physical and social emotional well-being. Schools really where kids, and I would say also teachers, are thriving. And those can be designed, and that's what our organization does.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. And books, we've talked about your book. Is there another book that comes to mind that you would recommend?
Well, I would say, as an entrepreneur, a book that I recently read is called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And it's a book that really helps you stretch your thinking about what's possible, and get out of limiting mindsets, and really take your business and your work to a completely different level by thinking differently and operating differently.
Excellent. Thanks for that recommendation. We'll have links to your book, Jeff, as well as that book on the show notes page for this episode at thehowofbusiness.com. All right, let's wrap it up, Jeff. What's one thing you want to stick away from this conversation we've had based on your book, Ask? What's one key takeaway, especially from the perspective of a small business owner?
I would say probably the most important takeaway is to remember, as you walk around and interact with your stakeholders, whether that's your customers, your clients, your employees, your suppliers, your investors, etc., there is something important that you can learn from every single one of them that they're probably not telling you. And that with the right questions and the right approach, you can unlock a gold mine of insight that can really catapult you forward in your business, your leadership, and in your relationships.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this applies so importantly and so valuably to a small business owner. I often say to people, the business is out there, not here behind the desk or behind the computer. We can spend all the money we want on marketing and analysis and surveys, but it's asking those questions of our staff, of our vendors, as you said, of our customers and clients in particular. That's where the gold is. And if we get better and better at doing that, which is the process that you lay out, the practices that you lay out in the book, boy, that is so incredibly valuable, not just in learning what's working and what's not working or where to navigate our business, but also in leading our teams and virtual teams to achieve greater and greater things.
I 100% agree. And I think it's especially important for small business owners because you don't have the luxury of a market research department
No.
or lots and lots of staff. And so you have to be scrappy. And the best way to be scrappy is to make use of what you have right in front of you. And the insights are right around you. And so this is a way to tap into that.
Tell us again where you want us to go online to learn more.
www.askapproach.com.
And we'll have a link to that on the website at thehowofbusiness.com as well. Jeff, insightful conversation. We could talk for another couple hours about this. Thanks so much for the book and for being willing to come on the show and share and spend some time with me today.
Thanks, Henry. I really enjoyed the conversation.
This is Henry Lopez, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again is Jeff Wetzler. I release new episodes every Monday morning. You can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including the How of Business YouTube channel and my website, thehowofbusiness.com. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.